Hello, today we have with us Don Hockenberry, who's the Associate Professor of Psychology here at Tulsa Community College. I'm Randy Dominguez, the Dean of Distance Learning and Academic Technology, and today we're going to talk about online testing and in particular Respondus web monitor software for online testing. Don, we talked a little earlier, but can you tell the audience what you were doing initially for regular classes teaching psychology? What kind of assessments were involved in those classes?
You know, it's going to vary. It varies, Randy, from psychology class to psychology class. So a class we have called Human Relations, much of that was experiential activities in the course of that class where students were learning interpersonal communication skills and a variety of other things. But it was a very different kind of class. But in my basic classes, Introduction to Psychology, Developmental Psychology, Social Psychology, you cover so much information. The fairest way to test students is some form of recognition testing. So honestly, I use a lot of multiple choice tests in my core classes just because that's the fairest way to teach students.
Okay. Would you say that most of the tests themselves are geared to like 50% exams, 50% assignments? What's your percentages?
More like for me, it's like about 75% exams and about 25% assignments.
Okay.
So doing papers, doing presentations.
Pretty intensive then for having assessments in the class.
Sir, I'm sorry.
Pretty intensive to have a lot of assessments.
Yeah, it is. Oh, very much so. And that's what the psychological research supports too. I mean, psychological research says that. And I made fundamental alterations about 10 years ago when the educational psychology research was saying that quiz often, and I went to short quiz format at the beginning of every class with 10 questions, and they knew exactly what it was going to cover, so they could walk in prepared. And yeah, I suppose in one sense you could argue it's pretty intensive, but they know ahead of time everything. It's not like I'm springing it on them.
Okay. Did you have to change anything from what you were doing in the classroom when you moved this course online, when you went to teaching online and assessing online? What were kind of some of the initial changes that you had to do?
Well, what's interesting here, Randy, is I really, initially, I had no interest in teaching online. Mm-hmm. The reason along with being an associate professor here at Tulsa Community College, I'm the co-author of 2 introductory psychology textbooks, and back in the early 2000s when online classes were becoming more popular, right, and I was hearing more and more from faculty around the country saying, can you do this for my online classes? And I really wasn't sure the kinds of issues they were grappling with, and so that was actually the motivation for me to initially start teaching online, was to get a better sense of empathy for what my colleagues around the country were doing and what they needed in terms of an online class. And I found the needs were the same, but it was a matter of like porting those needs to an online environment. And it was very clear to me that one of the things, things that we did and things that I do in the classroom and activities that I've developed for faculty for use in the classroom needed to be modified in order to work in an online environment. But the exciting thing was that the online environment opened up all kinds of incredible opportunities in terms of, especially in psychology, all kinds of opportunities to have students visit some very, very top-notch websites.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the assessment part of that is, did you have to change anything in that regard, or did you, obviously, the infrastructure of testing online,
yes,
it's not very secure traditionally, and so what did you do to make changes to verify student identities, to deal with some of those issues? When
I first started teaching online, I allowed my students to take their tests online. This was the very first semester. And what after so many years of teaching, at the point I started online teaching, I'd already had 25 years of teaching experience, and I had a pretty good idea of what a typical grade scenario was in any particular class. And typically in my face-to-face classes, you would see kind of a bimodal distribution. But in my online classes, my God, the test scores skyrocketed that first semester. And I considered several things. I considered that, there's rampant cheating going on. I also considered the possibility that what I thought were my sparkling, insightful, witty, engaging lectures were actually numbing my students. I considered that possibility.
Okay.
I looked for a variety of different correlations, but no, it was scores were skyrocketing. And at the end of that first semester, I mean, I was so concerned about this because this was a full 16-week class, but at the end of the semester, I told my students there was an issue with the online testing, and we had to take the last test in the testing center where it was going to be proctored. Scores dropped like a rock.
Okay.
So following that first semester, I said, okay, that's it. And all of my classes for the next several years were proctored. Proctored testing, where they utilized any one of the testing centers here at Tulsa Community College. And then what happened is I did that for several years, and it worked flawlessly. It was perfect. My students had ample time to take tests. I also allowed my students to bring in 2 pages of what I call test notes. They take a quiz over the web activity and the videos, and then they have a test over the assigned reading material. But they're allowed to bring in 2 pages of test notes. That's one side, 2 pieces of paper, or one side, 1 piece of paper front and back. And that sounds very magnanimous, but that's also another way for the students to rehearse the material. But in any case, they were allowed to do that. And that worked, like I said, flawlessly for several years. But what started happening was my student feedback at the end of every class. My students give me feedback on the class, and it doesn't have to be positive. It can be whatever. They can give me their candid feedback. And I was getting more and more complaints about
having to come to campus.
Having to come to campus and proctor testing, and why can't we take it online? And so I said, I kind of bit the bullet, and I remembered my initial experience, and I said, okay, I can set this up in a way that it's going to minimize cheating, flipping through the textbook and looking up answers. And initially, what I did is I set the time limit for like an 80-item multiple choice test at 50 minutes, which is, from years of teaching experience, I know that's probably 98% of my students finish in 50 minutes or less in the classroom. All right, so I was doing it online, and I got grumps about the fact that it was very tight. They felt pressured by the time, but nonetheless, it actually seemed to kind of keep the playing field level. My students always had the option to go to the testing center.
A little more difficult to cheat when you've got a time
right.
limit. Yes.
But they always had the option. If they really felt the time was an issue, they always had the option to go to the testing center and have a longer time period to take the test.
Okay. So we're talking about test security or test validation, et cetera. Proctoring was one of the best techniques at the time.
Yes.
For dealing with that issue, because you're obviously bringing people in, et cetera. Now we have this new software that we call, it's called Monitor, web monitor software through Respondus. Respondus also has a lockdown browser, which is a secure web browser. This is something new that you've tried in your classes, and tell us a little bit about that experience. What is that doing for you in your class, and positive, negative?
Well,
what can you tell us?
Jennifer Campbell, who is one of our Blackboard gurus here at TCC, told me about the fact that the monitor people, the Respondus monitor people, had given us 100 seats so we could just give it a test run. And I watched the demo of it in February, and I was very excited by what I saw in the demo. And so I talked to Linda, and I talked to Linda and Jennifer, and said I'd like to do this with my intercession class. Now keep in mind, an intercession class is only 4 weeks long, and this is also when we upgrade Blackboard. So I picked like the worst possible scenario here to try this. I'm not sure what I was thinking. And I was fully expecting all kinds of technological issues, and that is not what I experienced. In fact, it worked flawlessly. There was one student had an issue, and I was able to resolve that for her over the phone with what I know about the Mac and PC operating systems. But I was stunned. It worked perfectly.
So from an instructor's perspective, can you explain what do you need to do now as an instructor when you're viewing these tests or looking at these tests, that students use this monitor software, monitor service actually is what it is. And is there more work involved? Is it more time consuming to grade and to look at that, or is that even an issue? Yeah,
no, it is somewhat of an issue, because now I have to have dual tests. So for every single assessment, whether it's a quiz or a test, I have a Respondus monitor version, and then I have a version that they take in the testing center. And so, yeah, that adds like another layer of work, but that's okay. That's fine. The videos are wonderful because you learn all kinds of different things. One of the things that I startled by are some of the conditions under which students take tests at home. You know, with two kids saying, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," Jeff took my whatever. The one thing that I would say to faculty is that the learning curve here is very easy. Using Respondus Monitor is simply a matter of making some adjustments in the background settings. Students know how to use webcams. I mean, students are using, they use Skype, they use all kinds of different things for the webcams. They're posting their videos on YouTube. This is really sort of a non-issue. And for my students, I always give my students the option. They do not have to use Respondus Monitor. They always have the option to go to a testing center in a proctored situation there. And they also have that option with slightly longer time limits to give them additional time. And they also have slightly longer deadline to use the proctored setting at one of our testing centers. I mean, I'm not suggesting you do that, but I would suggest that all I'm saying is that that's what I do, and it works very well for me. But it's not a steep learning curve here, not at all. It's actually very easy to implement.
Is there a correlation between those that are testing with Monitor now, the software at home, versus those testing in a proctored setting? Does it seem to be the same?
Oh, it has leveled the playing field, Randy. It is, part of my goal in using Respondus Monitor was to give my students the same basic assessment experience, whether they took it at a testing center under proctored conditions there, or whether they took it at home. And that's how I also explain it to my students. I tell them I want everybody to have the same opportunities here. And if you want the convenience of taking it at home on your personal computer, then you have to use Respondus Monitor and a webcam.
Very good. Well, Don, thank you. Anything else that you'd like to add about using this software or even testing online?
I think probably the thing that just really startled me was the fact that it really does work well. Yeah. And when you look at the student videos, I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can look at them. You've got a full panel of, they take little snippets throughout the testing time, and so you can look at those photos. That right there is going to give you an idea of whether or not something is going on. And then you can tap in at any point in the series of photos and see what the student is doing and listen and so forth. It's really very it's very useful. It just, like I said, it really does kind of level the playing field for students.
Well, Don, thank you for your time. I appreciate what you've told us here today. It's very interesting. I'm Randy Dominguez, again, Dean of Distance Learning. This is Don Hockenberry. We're talking about Respondus Monitor software, which is a test-taking proctored software using a camera for the student at their desktop, at their home PC. And using what's called the lockdown browser so that the student can only take that exam. So it's a new assessment tool. Hopefully, if you're a faculty member, you're interested in using that yourself, try it out in your online courses. Welcome any further discussions from that. Give us a call, send us an email, and thank you again.